I was on a packed Rome metro, the car doing that warm metal and deodorant blend that passes for air down there. Across from me was a sunburned Midwestern dad in a polo the exact shade of ketchup, fanning himself with a paper map of Europe like it had personally betrayed him. He jabbed at the ticket machine sticker that said Euro only and came out with, "If you guys just used real money like dollars, all this conversion nonsense would go away." The local next to him patiently explained the entire concept of the Eurozone like a TED Talk for one. I just watched him nod along the way people do when they're not learning, just waiting for the world to change to their settings. In the Scottish Highlands, wind cutting sideways and midges chewing on anyone who stood still too long, a tour bus had pulled up at one of those viewpoint laybys with the loch and ruined tower in the distance. A guy in a brand new camo jacket, the kind that has never seen a tree, stepped down like he was storming Normandy. He squinted at the map board, at the hills, at the ruins, then announced to his wife, "So is this the bit where we can just walk over into England, or do they stop you at the line?" The guide gave a slow blink and explained Scotland, England, borders, and how a loch is not a moat. Somewhere behind me, an old man just tightened his scarf like he was protecting his remaining patients from the weather too. On a side street in Paris near the Luxembourg Gardens, the air smelled like espresso and car exhaust and someone's cigarette break. I was at a tiny metal table when a Florida honeymooner in matching just married hoodies sat down, his sneakers so white they were a cry for help. He waved the waitress over, pointed at the price on the menu, and said, "So that's like 15 US, right? And you guys add tax and refill coffee for free like a normal place?" She calmly explained service included, different tax system, and that iced coffee with bottomless refills was not a French human right. I just watched him stare at his tiny espresso like it had personally chosen violence against the concept of refills. In Berlin, near the East Side Gallery, drizzle turning the graffiti into a slightly sad watercolor. A tour group clustered around a section of the old wall. At the edge was a guy in a vintage rock band tee that was clearly bought last week, filming everything in vertical like history should fit his phone. He stepped closer to the concrete, frowned at the chipped paint and worn edges, and asked the guide, "So is this like an original, or did they rebuild it for tourists since, like, the medieval times?" The guide very politely walked him through 1961, 1989, Cold War, all of it, without once raising his voice. A German grandpa nearby just looked at the river like he'd finally found something that didn't ask him dumb questions. It was late afternoon in Barcelona, shutters already coming down on the little side streets, while the heat held on like it paid rent. I sat on a bench near a closed bakery when a stocky guy in a baseball cap that said, "Hustle harder," tried the door 3 times. He checked his watch dramatically, glared at the sign about siesta hours, and declared to no one in particular, if they just stayed open like proper businesses, their GDP would explode, man. This is why Europe's behind. A woman next to him, probably on her actual break, explained siesta. Different work culture, family time. He nodded like he was drafting a memo for the continent. I just thought any place that voluntarily ignores his TED Talk is probably doing fine. In Amsterdam on a gray morning, the kind where the canals look like they're thinking about something, a tour group was massing at a big intersection. A tall guy in a sleeveless gym shirt and noise-canceling headphones dangled from his neck, bouncing on his heels like the city was his treadmill. He stepped straight into the red bike lane, planted himself there checking his smartwatch, then pointed at the approaching cyclists and said, "They should really put these bike things on the sidewalk so cars can use the roads properly." The swarm of Dutch commuters parted around him with that practiced, silent fury only people on bikes develop. The guide gently pulled him back to the curb, and you could feel every cyclist thinking the same thing. Evolution needs more paperwork. Up in Switzerland, on a mountain train rolling toward Jungfraujoch, The snow outside was blinding while the carriage hummed along quietly. Across from me, a retired-looking guy in a brand-new hiking outfit, tags probably still in his suitcase, sat with his arms folded like he was reviewing the Alps. He looked around, frowned at the open window crack and the old wooden interior, and came out with, "Back home, this would all be air-conditioned, carpeted, and fenced off so nobody sues. How do they even allow this to run?" A Swiss couple next to him calmly explained liability, hiking culture, and the idea that mountains exist before insurance companies. I just watched him glance at the sheer cliff outside like it was badly planned real estate waiting for a strip mall. In Athens up by the Acropolis, the marble glowing that soft beige in the late sun, and the air full of dust and selfie sticks, a guy in a sleeveless flag-themed tank top trudged up the last steps. He was breathing like the hill had personally wronged him, clutching a warm bottle of cola. As soon as he reached a roped-off column, he stepped over the line, leaned against the stone, and said to his girlfriend, "If this was back home, they'd at least let you touch it, and what's the point of old stuff you can't lean on?" The guard didn't even rush, just walked over with the slow, heavy stride of a man who's seen this movie 1,000 times and gently moved him back. Every local there managed to roll their eyes without moving a single muscle. In Dublin, late evening, rain taking a break for once, I was wedged into a quiet corner of a proper old pub, where the wood has outlived several governments. A guy in a varsity jacket and cargo shorts pushed up to the bar, looking at the taps like he was choosing a new car. He asked the barman what tasted most like his usual light lager. Then, when the pint arrived dark and creamy, he took one sip and announced, "Man, if they just stocked regular American beer, this place would kill it during football season." The barman calmly asked which kind of football he meant and pointed at the TV showing hurling like it was an answer and a warning at the same time. I just watched him nurse that pint like it was a punishment from an ancestor. Stockholm in early spring feels cleaner than most people's kitchens, with that cold light bouncing off the water and glass. A tour group was gathered in Gamla Stan, and at the front was a woman in a brand new puffer coat, clutching a phrase book she clearly hadn't opened. She listened to the guide speak Swedish to a shop owner, then turned to her husband and said, "It's so weird hearing them mangle English like that instead of just using the regular version." The guide, in almost perfect American accent, switched to English and explained that Swedish was, in fact, its own language. Her husband laughed it off while checking his phone, and you could see her trying to decide if any of that new information was going to be allowed into their marriage. In Salzburg, the hills really do look like they'd burst into song if someone paid them union rates, and the air smelled faintly of rain and pretzels. I was on a Sound of Music-themed tour when a man in a tucked-in golf shirt, clearly the self-appointed family planner, kept walking ahead with the brochure. He stared at one meadow, then at a farmhouse, then back at the guide and asked, "So why don't these guys just recreate the movie set exactly? They'd make a killing if it matched the film shot for shot." The guide patiently explained private property, actual farming, and how the film used multiple locations and studio work. He nodded slowly, disappointed, like Austria had missed its quarterly nostalgia targets. In Lisbon's Alfama district, streets too narrow for anything larger than a bad decision, the smell of grilled sardines clung to the air. A cruise ship couple had wandered into a tiny tasca and ordered bacalhau because the internet told them to be authentic. The husband, in a polo with his company logo, poked at the fish, found a bone, and announced, "If this was served in a decent chain back home, there'd be no bones and unlimited breadsticks. They'd clean up here." The owner, who'd probably been cooking that recipe longer than the guy's company had existed, nodded politely and offered to debone it. The look on the wife's face said she knew exactly which one of them was out of his depth, and it wasn't the man wielding the knife. I was in Reykjavik in late summer when night is more of a suggestion than a fact, standing near the waterfront, watching tired tourists pretend they weren't confused by the time. Next to me, an Arizona truck guy in a sleeveless flannel was arguing with his phone's world clock. He squinted at the sky, then at the bright numbers, and finally told his buddy, if they just synced this place to normal US time and weather, people wouldn't be so messed up by the sun thing. A local overheard, smiled, and explained the whole latitude, midnight sun, winter darkness package in the same tone you'd use to explain gravity to a child. I just pulled my jacket tighter and let the sky stay weird and completely uninterested in his scheduling preferences. On the European side of Istanbul, near Karaköy, the Bosphorus was doing its usual job of looking dramatic without trying. A guy in a faded college football hoodie leaned over the rail, scanning the water like he expected product placement. He watched a couple of dolphins surface in the distance, then shook his head and said to his friends, "Man, with all this coastline, you'd think they'd put in some proper beaches and boardwalks like back home instead of just old stuff and strays." His friend tried to explain shipping lanes, history, and the fact that the city is older than any of their home stadiums. Across from them, a fisherman just kept casting, absolutely confident no one was ever going to gentrify his patch of concrete. On Bondi Beach in Sydney, the sun felt like it had been sharpened overnight, and the sand was already too hot for anyone foolish enough to ditch their flip-flops. I was sitting under the thin mercy of a rented umbrella when a broad-shouldered guy in a stars and stripes swim shirt walked up to the lifeguard stand. He pointed at the red flag area, at the lack of kangaroos, at the wrong-way traffic up on the road, and finally settled on, "So when do the waves calm down for normal people, and where do you keep the kangaroos for photos?" The lifeguard, skin the color of someone who has read the UV index every day of his life, calmly explained rips, seasons, and the fact that wildlife here generally isn't a prop. At my age, you learn there's a special kind of peace in watching the ocean ignore a man who expects it to follow his resort brochure.